Anybody like to share anything with us this morning? Another week, another month. Interesting. Bad times bring good people together. Excuse me, I'll make that statement. Bad times bring good people together. Why?
Because good people don't like bad times.
I guess fear, I guess
What?
uncertainty, I guess...
Think about that.
Like to offer help or sympathy
There's a continuity in our relationships.
because we love each other.
See, we don't really begin to peek out behind the elements.
You get out of your comfort zone and you realize you need other people.
You need other people, and you need what specifically?
Support.
4 words, 4-letter word.
Help.
Help. I need help. See, for example, I called, because of some involvement with Alberto, I called Geneva Cervenik. He wants to sell his business. She doesn't sell businesses, so I called her to see who she could put me in contact with who might be able to help him. And basically, you're only essentially 4 people away from getting the help that you need once you start to look at it for it. And so when I talk with her, she gives me Dave's telephone number. I call Dave, who I'd never met before. And so Dave and I meet down at his place to have lunch. Lo and behold, it's David Cervenik. I've never met him before. And so you met somebody you never met before, right? You follow my point? And so God begins to move in such a way that nothing changes until he begins to point along the point of change. When he begins to move and he wants to orient me with change, he's starting to tighten the screws, because if he doesn't do that, I'm going to just sit there like this, you see, right? God will bring somebody in your life. There's an interesting story in 1 Kings chapter 20. Go back there, and I just want to point out something like this, because this guy is a rascal. And it's the 20th chapter of 1 Kings. This guy, many of you know him by his history as Ahab. Ahab. Ahab the king. Real scoundrel. Married to Jezebel. Even made him worse. But as I get into this guy has been so bad, but now he's moving into a situation with an enemy that's coming against him by the name of Ben-Hadad. But even in spite of his being as bad as they come, in verse 38, an interesting thing takes place. So the prophet departed, and you'll find that God now sends him a prophet to begin telling him what his problem is going to be. Now, for example, it only takes me a minute to get a command from God. Just a minute to get a command from God. But it may take a lifetime for the plan to develop. So there's a difference between the command God brings to pass and what he begins to bring to pass as a plan. All this guy knows initially is he's got big trouble in River City. In verse 35, and a certain man of the sons of the prophets said unto his neighbor in the word of the Lord, smite me, I pray thee, and the man refused. Anyway, I'm way ahead of my case. Go back over, and I want to go to the first time this comes up in chapter 20, verse 13. If you read the introduction to this, Ben-Hadad is starting in verse 1, the king of Syria gathered his hosts. He's got 32 kings, horses, and chariots, and he comes up to besiege Samaria. There's great consternation now with the king. But in verse 13 it says, and behold, there came a prophet unto Ahab, king of Israel, saying, thus saith the Lord, hast thou seen all this great multitude? Behold, I will deliver it into thine hand this day, and thou shalt know that I am the Lord thy God. He gets a message, doesn't even ask for it, and it doesn't tell us who the guy is. In verse 28, second round, because they've had a battle now, and there came a man of God and spake unto the king of Israel and said, thus saith the Lord, because the Syrians have said, the Lord is God of the hills, but he is not God of the valleys, therefore I will deliver all this great multitude in thine hand, and you shall know that I am the Lord. Second time it happens, still, we don't even know it's the same prophet. But God is bringing somebody to you. And then, in fact, like this lady that you've been trying to get, she doesn't really realize when she's getting a visitation, you see. But twice now, this has taken place. Now when I go over to verse 35, and it says in verse 35, and a certain man of the sons of the prophets said unto his neighbor, unto the Lord, smite me, I pray thee, and the man refused to smite him. Ultimately, in verse 38, in the preceding verses, he was wounded, so that the prophet departed and waited for the king by the way and disguised himself with ashes on his praise. Verse 31, he hasted and took the ashes away after he confronted the king. And the king of Israel discerned him that he was of the prophets. Third time, and we don't even know who the guy is. We don't know if it's 3 different people. But in each case, God has sent somebody into his life to let him know that you got a big problem. Here's what God's saying. And so frequently, my question then becomes, when do people understand when God speaks? Now, the reason I say that, God always has, and the Bible is a collection of plans. So when we get into this, there are 2 things that are represented when we get into anybody's plans. The other one is time. So if God has a plan, he now, for example, in your case, I'm going to cite that. You're on a time frame with God, whether you know it or not. See, you may go through all the ramifications, jumping up and down, hollering and screaming and griping and all the rest of it. But God has started working here. Somebody says, what does the future hold? For example, I was speaking on this in this church this morning. I put that way out here in the future. The future is always today. And what I had put on my calendar will happen in about another 45 minutes. You see, when God has his plan, he makes an announcement. I had prayed about this Sunday. I won't go into all of that. I had prayed about this Sunday. I do not know if what I'm asking concerning this place, if it's in God's plan. So I pondered, because the pastor said, I want you to take a Sunday, but it didn't happen. So I thought, well, maybe he forgot. God never forgets. So I was praying over it. I said, I sure would like to have that. As long as he's mentioned it, I'd like to have this Father's Day Sunday. So I thought that on our Wednesday morning meeting, I think I'll say something to him. And I said, I'm not going to say anything. I guess it's not in God's plan. So I come to meet with him on Wednesday morning for prayer. We sit down like this, and we start to talk about a little bit of everything. And finally he says, I wonder if you could do something for me. I said, I'd be glad to do something for you. What do you want me to do for you? He says, I'm going to be out of town here at the latter part of June. He said, could you take, I got 2 Sundays there. Could you take one of those Sundays and speak on? So I said, well, yeah. I said, I could do that. I said, is one of them Father's Day? He said, yeah. I said, I'll take it. With that information, I now know I'm in God's plan. I said, should I say something? Or no, he said, don't say anything. Actually, he didn't say that. But I felt that I shouldn't, because God is intuitive. So when he said, I'm entering into the plan. Now I say, will there be any additional petals to the plan? My daughter and my son-in-law are here this morning. Just by the situation occurring, because what they have in their agenda, they're coming to Ohio. I said, why don't you come up Father's Day? They said, we'll be there. They are petals of the plan. I sat with Ernie this morning, who's had a lot of consternation with some kids and so on and so on. He said, my granddaughter's going to be here this morning. You know what I hear? I hear more petals. What do you put in the word petal up there? Sounds kind of dumb. Beginning to blossom. You see. One of the things you have to recognize is, in God's plan, what's the time, and is it beginning to blossom? Because when God begins to work, he never works in a crevice. He always works in expanding what you're doing. Got to take my coat off. It is. I don't like to do this, but I got a shirt on, so
Professor, that's good. But is there any objective in that plan you know you perceive?
God doesn't reveal a plan from the beginning to the end. Now, for example, as I said, first of all, God gives a command. I want you to do this. Bang, I got the command. I don't have the plan.
I know you don't, but how about God?
Now you see, God says, for example, you are functioning right now in God's plan. What is the plan? He may want you to leave your job and go to Taiwan and preach the gospel. I don't know. And you don't know. But the thing of it is, I'll give you a pedal. You want a pedal on your plan? The day God saves your wife, it's beginning to blossom. Because God doesn't operate in a vacuum, and he knows unless I get some orientation, I'm locked out. I've got to begin to see this. What begins to cultivate that now? There are all kinds of problems with what I'm talking about. Anybody else have comments?
Yes.
Please.
My wife says the same thing. My wife told me one day that God gonna let me see the answer to my problem, but I have to pray hard every day because He want to show you the way out. That's what she said to me.
Okay.
The way out. But it's not time yet.
No,
The
you.
time is not here yet. That's what
But
she
you're
said.
getting started. I'll tell you why.
Yes. And then you show up. That's when you show up. And then she told me that. She says, now God starts showing you
I'll tell you why, though.
the way out when He start helping me to,
See,
you know. Yeah.
God always works with where I am at the time. Somebody says, God is open to everybody. Anybody. Bums can come in. Prostitutes, crooks, murderers, rapists, they can all come in. We want them just like they are. They can come in stinky, crummy looking. We put them on the front row. God saves them. But I tell you what, once they're saved, they got to change.
Yeah. Gotta stay.
I heard this business on this homosexuality the other night, and you're talking about God is open to every, oh yes he is, into the homosexuals. But if a homosexual comes here and gets saved, God expects this. You've got to change. Now, somebody says, what are the problems that we get into this? Part of the problem that we had, that you're going through, is I'm going to give it to you. There are two types of people that we're dealing with all the time. You represent one in the time plan that you're in. The first are mind people. Tough people to do with. You know why? They're methodical, they're analytical, and they want to make their decisions on this. Facts. Ultimately, they even drift from some of this. But the second type are heart people. People that function here want you to spell it all out so they can understand it. Do you know when you don't want to know when you start to please God? Would you like to know that?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe. Yeah, I believe it. It starts to happen when you start moving towards the supernatural.
Right.
You listening?
Yes.
You got to hear. God's inclination is to expose me once I'm coming out of what you guys are involved in. My daughter's been in a very serious financial problem. As I hear the problem with the balls in the air, more balls than you can got. Anyway, I'm thinking there's a whole arena of confusion here because the game plan changes every day. I'm going to be speaking in here about spiritual DNA in your family. So I say, my daughter has, and I want to tell you something, I think you'll agree. There is never joy in a family when a family member's in trouble. So I'm not happy. Why am I not happy? Because I have somebody in trouble. So I say on Wednesday, I'm going to close the door. I won't buy newspapers. I won't listen to the radio. I won't answer the phone. I'll close the door. I won't eat. And I will take it before God. Why? There's trouble with the blossoming at this stage. There's much consternation. There's an awful lot of pain. So, our people are more intuitive. They're more sensitive. They're more spontaneous. They can hear. They begin to drift toward revelation, perception, discernment, supernatural. None of what I just mentioned functions here.
That's the natural.
See, we pounded away last week on your natural thinking. Round the track, over the hoops, around and around until we all got tired, got a little edgy. Of course, I wasn't edgy, you were edgy. It wasn't me they were hearing out there, it was him. You see. So, as I begin to move in this situation, it's very tough for this person to talk to this person. See, you know why? That person can't hear. You can't hear.
Yes.
That's why people, when Jesus uses the words perplexity, he says to people, as we were talking about, going around the circle, over the hoops, getting mentally and physically exhausted, can't function. You see, heard that all of that in my
Looking under the rug.
daughter's life. So hear that in your life. There isn't any way to get out of this thing, so nothing you're going to tell me means anything. In other words, although you're bumping your gums, you ain't got a thing to say. You follow me?
Mm-hmm.
Over here, it's time to close the door. It's time to put the shades down, cut off the television. Anything that would afflict what you're going to ask God now has to be operating in this realm. As it starts to operate in this realm, he starts to take you out from around the track. You see. But we got to keep hearing this track business. This woman that you guys are talking to. She said, I don't want to hear it.
He listens to me.
See, God says when you reject this, you're in deep doo-doo. You see, because anybody that won't hear will never get here. They won't even do very well here. I think you've improved a little bit. Anyway, any comments? Now, I'll give you an illustration of that. I just received a wedding invitation, not mine.
Oh, come on, Fred.
God deals with events. How do I know that he deals with events? All weddings are what?
Fun.
All weddings are planned.
Oh, okay.
From the foundation of the earth, God has a big wedding planned at the end of the age, and he's had it from the foundation of the earth. It's called the wedding supper of the Lamb.
Found by God.
It's on his calendar. It's in the future. Just like when I put this stuff on my schedule, the days are going by. Time is passing. He said, I had a day for you when you were going and talk to Marshall. He has put this on his schedule. And I want to give you the reason why God waits. In any aspect of planning, God never moves until the last person is invited.
Then it's complete.
So you never know, as God works out from a command in his planning in time, It's the last one. Who do we know in this thing we're dealing with? You see, or this thing we're dealing with you, or with you. We don't know that. But God does, because he's working from the basis of a plan that you're involved in. And so when these things happen, here he's waiting for the last guest. Now, we don't know who else is going to come to these things. Now, here's an interesting thing to me. David Chevenik said to me, I might have a Muslim who's interested in this. Which means, it's interesting, even I think there's a little humor in this. He said, I believe that I'll take him down there because he starts family businesses. You won't have a problem with booze after that. He'll get rid of it while you still dally with it.
It's the one who owns Luna's, I just find out. He owns Luna's restaurant.
I don't know who he is, but
Yeah, that's
I'm
the
telling
one.
you,
Yeah, I find out, yes.
when you start working in this situation with people, you never know where God's going to take it. Go ahead.
You had heart, mind up there, and under mind you had facts.
Facts.
What will you put under heart?
Well,
And aren't we talking about the same person?
no, we're not talking about the same person, because this person is very methodical, analytical, and I'll tell you where this ends up. The mind person will end up in theology. I put that in as an afterthought. But the person with the heart, he's moving toward revelation.
But doesn't the mind person have to begin to understand that his heart will change his mind?
No, I don't think that. I think there are people that get stunted out who become mind people and never move from that. In fact, I think that's the problem with our church. In fact, I think that's the problem with most of the people that do the preaching. That this matter of what we're getting are all the facts and the figures and the how-tos and so on, but if we don't get the application, if it doesn't make an awareness in my mind, I'm going to go back to this. The interesting thing about Christ was, and we dealt with this, the one thing when he came on the scene, he is the first person in all of history that ever brought purpose into the lives of people. They surveyed him for two reasons. One, they observed his works. They saw what he did. The other was they saw his person. Now, the word behind what he was doing was a word that had never been mentioned in history before in the context of a person. The word was inspiration, you see. When I begin to see what's happened, let's take a visitation of that in this century, right now. This Warren produced a book called what? Purpose-Driven Life. 40 million people read it. Why? Because people don't associate this book with purpose. There had to be another author bring it to the scene that we're going to bring purpose. People read it and say, maybe I'll find purpose in life. We got 126 million church members. Why are they having to read Rick Warren's book? When I read this, and after I was saved, to begin to see what it said, I was inspired. I was inspired.
But what, prior to your salvation, were you a mind person or a heart person?
I was a mind person.
Okay, now you are.
I've gone through this whole system that I was just identifying here and responded to it.
Right, so you're now you are heart.
Heart.
Okay, it's the same person though.
I'm not saying it's not the same person, but it's the transition taking this through me, this grid, to reap this change.
I think the difference is that you have those people who are educated, who go through the educational process and never reach the change position.
Here's where they end up. Now, what that involves is, this is part of what I want to talk about this morning, they want to teach this so you can learn through education. This never works. The reason it doesn't work, and I'll come back to you in just a minute, the reason this doesn't work is because teaching never brings about conviction. So, for example, when let's go to the sex education, it can never work. I can educate you about sex and all of its ramifications and everything else, but it won't bring conviction to you to change.
But isn't that applying the academics to this book? Rather, you're not saying throw out academics. You're saying you cannot apply this book academically.
Now there's another interesting observation that we bring up in light of that. For example, whoever speaks about the book, here's a question I raised. Is he qualified? I didn't say was he educated. I said, was he qualified? There's a difference between your credentials and your qualifications. You see, somebody says, well, what are the difference? Has this been played out in your life? Have these changes taken place? You see, if we don't, everybody that comes in with a grid set. Somebody, you had one, but we, night after night as we beat on that drum, the grid set kept changing and changing and changing and changing. See, now you've moved over here to this other side. When you saw that film, the end of the Spear? Mm-hmm. They didn't educate you in your conclusions. You were convicted over your conclusions. Wow! You said it moved you to tears. It wiped you out. When's education going to do that? Mm-hmm. See, we get the facts and the figures from the academians. It doesn't do any of that. But when I begin to get this, as people observe Christ, it was interesting. Number one, in order for him to get credibility, here's what they had to conclude. Anything touched by politics and by religion is impure. In part of their arena of motivation now and inspiration, they looked at him, and here was their conclusion. He doesn't have a personal motive. In other words, there's nothing in it for him. And I use this example. If they had not seen that, he could never have said to them, unless this relationship between your mother and father becomes as hate, you can't follow me. They would have had to concluded, I'll follow him anyway because he's got what it takes. You see, there was nothing in his life that he got anything out of it. I'm going to be dealing with favor and favors. They're two different words. Because what I want to get into is how he increased and where he increased, how I increased, how you increased. Because the minute I step on the spiritual scale, two things happen. One, the old person begins to decrease, the new person begins to increase. That person has to be a heart person. He has to have some concept, even if he can't identify the plan that he's in. God is at work, right, Mike?
Yes, sir.
Keep going.
One of the problems that comes up is that the academician, the person who's really his God is the mind, equates heart to emotions. And that's not the point. It's not emotions.
But you see, they've associated it with the soul, not the spirit. Because God is always cutting the soul and the spirit asunder. He's dividing those constantly. And what I want to talk about this morning, the love of Christ that I have for his mother is not in the soul realm or the emotional realm.
The point I'm making is, you mentioned the end of the spear. Yeah, I wept at the end of that, but not out of emotion.
I didn't say that. I said out of conviction.
Right. My mind understood.
But it gripped your heart. Tears don't come from the mind. They come from the heart.
But when my mind understood it, it put it in perspective, and I saw where I stood.
Okay. But prior to that, you went through a process to learn something, right? You couldn't attend anybody's classroom to learn what you're telling us.
And I can't even tell anybody about
it. That can make enough sense to them. Unless I can orient you that what we're dealing with here is everything of the spirit and spiritual education. When I say that God gives 1 second to give you a command, I don't want you to do that anymore, Mike. Okay. What's the process? Now the plan. You see, now every time that God implements a plan, he puts it in time. That's why we're still here. I've got to see all the correlations of these things. If I don't, everything becomes mysticism. You know, I don't get anything out of it, or I come a couple times. We get all kinds of people like this. They'll come with all kinds of commitment the first time around. Then we don't see them anymore until we got another problem. You see, I'm not making an accusation. I don't know how long you'll stay. When the pressure comes off, you may be gone. Why? As a result, if that happens, you'll be stunted. Because you will not be going on to God's next part of the plan. Most people feel, I got saved, that's it. You know, hasta la vista, I'll see you later. But when God begins to work this process out, he has to have in the messenger the real thing. If he doesn't have the real thing and people can't if they can't see it, he's not qualified. You see. Anytime that you're involved with somebody that you feel God has brought in your life who can HELP you, and that person can help you, you've got to see this texture in the life, and that's one of the things I want to get to. There has to be a certain texture that God gives. If there isn't, the messenger has no credibility. Okay? Comments, observations, disagreement?
Can we call that natural and supernatural? The facts and heart? Heart is the
Let me
supernatural?
say that what God takes pleasure in is when I go through the supernatural, because I'm asking him to implement help that I can't supply. Friday, everything worked out for her. All the opposition, all of the headaches, all the balls in the air, all the consternation was eliminated. Now I can always tell when I think that's happening because I don't hear from her. You got it? When we got the problem, I hear from her. Oh, yeah, but when we don't have it anymore, it will come in stride.
I got a son like that.
You see.
My son is.
Now I could. You know what I heard in her voice? I heard the smile in her voice. Oh yes. Yeah. Now you know what? The family member at that moment is no longer in trouble. You know what that brought here? What?
Joy.
Relief. So we get ready for the next one. This is an ongoing process. See, one of the things that a father is, he's a progenitor. You know what a progenitor is?
No.
Most fathers don't. He's also a protector, a provider, a priest, a patriarch, an upholder, a nourisher, a forefather. Wow. And a progenitor. Did you know you were all those things? I'll let you shoot yourself.
Sometimes the kids, they don't give you a chance. They leave home too early, isn't it? Sometimes they leave you early. My son left me when he was 18. My
My son
daughter
never
got
left.
married when she was 19. She left me. So I didn't get the chance to. This process takes
I
forever.
believe you. I like your statement, mind
You know,
and heart.
takes forever.
Okay, that's good. But
We all
what I
go.
don't understand is what make the change from mind to heart.
You're into God's process, and I want to come back to what I said. For example, the minute I come to him with something that I can't handle, because God hates self-sufficiency. Most people who are self-sufficient will stand on their pedigree of where they're coming from, insisting this is correct. We battled against that last week.
Right.
Unless God gets in the minute that I took the problem in my house, and I've got other ones, before God, when I do this, it's very serious business. I don't fast until I have serious business with God. And I'll tell you why I don't. First of all, I like to read the morning paper. The paper goes. I like to have my mocha. That goes. I like to turn on the news. That goes. The telephone. The phone calls come. I wonder who's calling. That has to go. Why? God doesn't compete with noise. I can't get up. I can't get off. Somebody says, what is wickedness? I'll give you wickedness. Getting up on Sunday morning, turn all the televisions on. You know why that's wicked? Because it's all noise, and people track out in 100 different directions now because of what they heard. See? It's wicked. But we're going to do it anyway because we got to do this, that, and the other thing. God says, shut the noise down. The reason people don't get this type of stuff and you don't get it changes, there's just too much noise. And God always speaks very silently. Now, for example, he could have sent a person in to help me. But what I'm doing up here in Ohio, he has to be doing down in Virginia. He has to be closing out somebody's thinking who's put all of these machinations on the table that's got everybody going in different directions. In fact, when I first heard her describe this person who she's selling to, I said, he's a charlatan. He's going to get your hopes up and they're going to fall down. Now you're going to be more discouraged than you were because you predicated what you're going to be doing in your future based on what he's telling you, and he's a liar. Can I call a guy that? I've got to sit down and say, God, I don't know anything about the players in this thing. It's all happening in Virginia, just like whatever's happening in your life is part of it's happening in Taiwan this morning. But the minute I take this to him, he says, you're doing the right thing. I says, why am I doing the right thing? He says, you're not dependent on your own strength. See? Or your own academia, or your own intelligence. Gee, that's fantastic. Why didn't you tell me that? What I'm in is a process of identity. Oh, you say, what are you talking about, process of identity? Anytime I move toward the supernatural, I'm becoming more like Christ. I'm being conformed to the image. So, now, as that process takes place, God begins to bring two other things into my life. Anytime that he starts to bring favor in my life, in my responses to him, he starts opening this up. See, this is where he wants me to get. Now, somebody says, well, how do I know that? If I go over to Mark, chapter 2, verse 12. How is God going to give this itinerant carpenter such exposure when there's no newspapers or television? I'm sure the advertising people that would have talked to Jesus in that day and age said, hey, buddy, you're on a dead-end street. You don't have any money. You don't have the right relationships. You come from the wrong family, from the wrong side of the street. Don't bother us. You don't have any money, you don't have anything. We can't help you. But if you watch through this process in Mark's stack in chapter 2, and immediately he rose, took up the bed, went forth from them all, insomuch they were all amazed. God begins to do amazing things. They were amazed. And you know what they said? We never saw it done like this before. He was now moving from inspiration to performance. There's another key word here too, you see. All losers should have aspiration. Aspiration means I have a desire to get out of my problem, but I can't get out of it. No hope. Christ comes upon the scene, the first person in all of history who inspires the masses and begins to tell them they have hope. Because as a nobody, he starts doing all kinds of things they can't believe. So here it says, whew, we never saw it like this before. You see, we need some of that. Go over to Mark chapter 5, verse 20. Mark 5:20. And he departed and began to publish in Decapolis how great things that Jesus had done for him. Listen now. They marveled. Mike, you're a press release for Christ. People will look at you and say, that's marvelous. God says, I want to do something for you if I can break through your thinking that you couldn't do so you can do something like this. This is new PR. I got a hunch that maybe a couple of the advertising companies at that day and age would probably say, you know, this guy may have something. We've got to go over and talk to him. Hey, maybe we can help him. They marveled. In fact, in chapter 5 again, verse 42, and straightway the damsel arose and walked. She was aged 12, and they were not only astonished at this time, there's another word there. It says they were greatly astonished. Wow. Now somebody says, well, I can't do what he does. God will put the same stamps on you that he puts on him. Chapter 6, verse 2. When the Sabbath was come, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many hearing him, here's that word again, they were simply astonished, saying, from whence has this man these things? What wisdom? This which is given to him, that even such mighty works are wrought by his hands. Now listen to the question. Is this not the carpenter's son? This guy doesn't have a PhD, doesn't have good family relationships, he's got nobody in politics. Military doesn't care much for him either. You know what happened as a result? People became offended. Well, you know, I got an interesting word on critics. They became his critics. Give you that. If I can find it. Don't know if I can find it. Anyway, that was a good line. Critics. Every time you start to, when we're done out here today, there will be people who are critical. You see. Why? Because people don't want to hear it. Two groups were lining up. One group was saying we didn't find any fault in him. The other group was saying, hey, we ought to kill him. If that's not two different mindsets, I don't know. Do you? How can you get more diverse mindsets? Let's kill him! I want to tell you, these great things are being done. So, anyway, what I wanted to point out was, and I'm not quite finished there, we'll go there and finish that up still in Mark. I was in Mark, I guess, chapter 7. Anyway, go over to Mark 10. It says they were, listen to this one. Now it says they were not only astonished at what they were doing, in Mark 10, verse 26, it says they were astonished out of measure. This thing pushed them to the limits. You know what was happening? They couldn't function now within their mindsets. He was breaking it up. These people were now beginning to think very differently. When I go over to Mark 11:18, interesting. Verse 18, and the scribes and chief priests heard it and sought how they might destroy him. You know why? They were afraid. All that head knowledge and all that background and all it did with the religious group was make them afraid. Now, Paul could have heard what he heard in that movie thing and could have been afraid and said, man, I don't want any more of that. Somebody could say, get that opinion. Somebody can hear this morning what they're going to hear. And they say, I don't even want to listen to that kind of stuff. I'm disgusted, you see.
But that was Jesus' purpose to get them afraid.
I'm sorry?
That was his purpose, to get them afraid and upset and everything.
Wasn't his purpose. That was what the results were. His purpose was not to make them fearful because they had the same access to him as everybody else had. But the reason they were afraid that it started to contradict all of their traditions and their thinking. He was out of the mindset of these people. He pushed beyond the parameters. Nobody could understand him. And the things that he talked about, they said, we never ever heard anything like this before. You see, what was his qualifications? When people don't understand things, they become your critics.
You know, what's interesting is when you share that, it's just like with the Da Vinci Code. A lot of people talk about the movie, but nobody talked about praying for the individual for his salvation. To me, something like this is when you have people who know the Lord, they don't recognize, they want to be critics instead of wanting to take it before the Lord to pray about it and ask for discernment. Instead, they want to raise up a barrier right away and say, this guy's too strict, he's not tolerant enough, but nobody wants to take it to Christ. Even though they're educated, they don't even realize that they need to pray for this situation because it might be something that God is opening up in their own life that they can't even see. Just like Christ was revealing to those scribes and Pharisees, you guys are missing the mark. And instead of listening to his voice and asking God for understanding on what this man was bringing, they wrote him off. And then they wanted to chastise him and kill him.
two things happen at that stage of the game. One group is going up, one group is going down. Jesus never listened to his critics. You know why? Critics are not achievers. They weren't doing anything. If they could have even mounted up some minuscule thing that he was doing, they would have said, look what we're doing too. We're doing things. Why are you so outstanding? I'm doing essentially what you're doing. With God, that never works, because he will always do something you can't do. The church is learning for something like this, for it to do something so the people can see it and say, we can't do that because all our critics out there, maybe a lot of them are right. A critic is somebody that never says a good thing about anything. That's why when we see an adversarial people like we've got, that's all we got today. The Republicans say something, I don't bother to listen to the responses because all they're going to do is criticize them. Yeah. They have formed a destructive focus, and their goal is to destroy things. The problem of it is, it's that mindset. Now, after all these things, I think I just about finished. I may have one more here. What did Jesus have that you ought to have? First of all, he didn't have anything, but he had this. There are 4 elements that go into favor. I've just read a thing, some of you, I gave it to you, and you read it. It was about the president and about the fact that the president was not losing his ratings. He was losing favor with God. And God was humbling him because he was now removing favor. He's getting all this criticism. So you know what we've done? We've been praying for favor. I'm not getting into his politics, but in the events of the last week or 10 days, it's gone up 2 points. When you enter into God's plan, he'll give you a blossom. Somebody says, what's the blossom? Well, Zakawi didn't do too good. The blossom is that God gave him something that increased his favor just a little bit. Everyone is working on the same edge. I'll ask you this one, what's your stature? What's your stature out there? How do I know that? Go over to Luke chapter 2. I'll give you then it says he increased in wisdom. Verse 52. And finally, he increased in favor, and this happens with both God and men. There was one that you could get it in another one of the Gospels. It's called grace. But that's something that definition is nobody deserves, so I won't go into that. But these were things that were being cultivated in him, you see. For a guy that doesn't have anything, how's he going to get the king's ear? Why would Herod want to have him come in? So many different tricks. This was his reputation that God was giving him. Wisdom. They said, we never heard anything come out of anybody's mouth like that. That's something to listen to. That's why they all wanted to go up on the hills and hear him. Can you imagine? Then he had to give them an event. He says, how many people are here? He says, there's 5,000. He says, well, let's turn them away, his disciples. He says, well, no, he says, we can't, they're going to get weary. Well, he says, we can't feed them. And it's almost dark. He says, that's all right. How much do we've got here? We got a little something. So he says, here's the event. Sit them down in rows. So he sits them down in rows, and then they bring the loaves and fishes. He says, count them. He says, we have 2 and 5. They says, that's all right. We'll bless them and see what happens. God gives it through Christ an event. What does he give them? The supernatural. And let me tell you, no matter what problem you are in, you're always 1 minute away from getting out of it at the next phone call. We get all kinds of people that come and go with all kinds of problems. It said he was full of grace and truth. You know what people said after they heard him a while? Whatever the guy's about, he's the real thing, the real McCoy. There ain't no counterfeit when we're dealing with this guy. That's what you call inspiration. When he had finished and was resurrected, that whole arena were inspired to what? Follow him. So when I go through this process, wisdom. You'll never get it watching television or reading a newspaper. God says, there's an interesting verse if I can remember. Where did I have that? It's in Proverbs chapter 8. Proverbs chapter 8. I think I can remember it. Verse 4. It says, does not wisdom cry, understanding put forth her voice? She standeth in the way of high places. Verse 5, O ye understand wisdom, ye fools be of an understanding heart. Chapter 18, verse 4, the words of a man's mouth are as deep waters, and the wellspring of wisdom as a flowing brook. That was the one I wanted. That one in 18 verse. It was 18:4. When I begin to get in things like that, God begins to say, I'm going to increase you. Now, we're not going to have much time to get into it. These words, wisdom and stature, they apply, they speak for themselves. But when we get to favor, did you know you could ask for it? I've been in situations where I were very touchy situations before when I said, God, send favor ahead of me. Give that person an understanding heart, because there's nothing I can say to that person they're going to understand me. You know what? There's a difference be that in favors. Somebody says, what's the difference? The reason that Jesus increased in favor here, the reason was nobody was obligated. What he did is to give him, in essence, a gift. He increased in favor because the whole world that observed him knew that it wasn't obligated. You don't have to pay me back. I told my grandchildren, one of them called me and he said, hey, Pop, would you loan me some money? I said, what do you want it for? They said, well, I want it for this. I said, I never loan my grandchildren money. Oh, I said, I give it to them. You know their favor with me? GKs, grandkids. They all have favor. I don't expect them to pay me back.
What about your kids?
I owe
Not as much
you. What
favor.
are you laughing about? This is what politicians do and business people do. They grant favors. Favors that I do for you means that I want to pay back, that I've got chits. If I do something for you, I'm going to call for reimbursements. Maybe not dollars. But I will call back on you for something that you're obligated, and you know you're obligated. So, for example, when it says, owe no man nothing, what happens is every man that owes somebody else knows he's obligated. And what that does, it puts pressure on relationships, because when somebody owes you money, they don't like to be around you. If I give them the money, never have a problem. This process of obligation here, Jesus was doing everything without obligation. Now, for example, if the politicians and the religious people could have found that he was taking something under the table, they would have destroyed him. One time. Just one time, he's gone. Out the door. His whole lifetime was operating on that. I remember Paul, when I first got with Paul, Paul thought, what was my motivation? Trying to sell him an air conditioning unit? See, he sensed that, what's your motive? What's the motive behind a guy? This is one of the keys to favor. And there are 5 ways you can get it, which I can't get into. I might give you the ways. But if you're going to get that, the Word of God says, if you don't have it, for example, like this lady that you talk, ask God to give you a favor. Anytime you're going up against something pretty hard, just like over in the neighborhood, ask God to give you a favor. See, that means He'll go before you and prepare mindsets for you. I'm sure you've probably used it before, right? So, anyway, that's the way it is. Yeah, Mike?
I have a question. If you could, you mentioned soul and spirit. Could you kind of give a breakdown of soul and spirit, the difference?
What were you going to?
Soul and spirit, the difference?
Yeah. Soul of the spirit is made up of your intellect, your emotions, and your will. That's your soul. So when I say to you, Mike, your identity, you stand up. And I say, get me a glass of water, your will go out and either choose to get me the glass of water or refuse me the glass of water. You see. When I go to the spirit, God is dealing with fruit. Those are what I call blossoms. What are the fruit? Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, faith, gentleness, meekness, temperance. Against such a law. And nobody's born with those. God has to manufacture those. So one of the things when I talk about my love for my wife today, this hasn't anything to do with me. All my hatred and all that has dried up, just gone. Wish I had. The fruit today is the love of Christ shed abroad in my heart by the Holy Ghost which is in me. Has nothing to do with my emotions. My emotions dialed her out a long time ago. See? And so when we're dealing with all these bad relationships that exist, so these people dial each other out because of what they did in their behavior. And as Paul cited so excellently about this movie, that it shows so graphically the life of Christ in a person who's raised above somebody's behavior and what they did, and removes blame. I'm going to give you these things. One is excellence. I'll break these down more. When I say excellence, it's in stature. How? The life lived this way. You see. Why? I'll give you the scriptures of that. Whatsoever thine hand find to do it with all our might. Our problem is most people are mediocre. It's very difficult to find this in people today. Noble character, performance, commitment, doing what they should do, always being on top. Missing. Problem solving. Everybody in life is designed to solve problems. Withhold not good from them to who it is due when it is in the power of thine hand to do it. You came out of your office yesterday, or your building, and you called to me. You came to the side of the car, and you said, I have a problem, didn't you? I said, what's your problem? Your air conditioning wasn't working, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you think I could solve your problem?
Yes,
That's why you came.
yes.
You didn't come there if I'd have been a plumber or a carpenter.
I could ask you if you know somebody.
You're killing my point. Shut up.
Don't say no.
I just tell you
Say
when
no.
it comes to my heart, you know.
Say no.
Okay, no.
But you thought we could solve your problem.
Yes.
Did we?
Yes.
Listen to what I'm going to say. You never solve problems if you can't solve your own. God wants you to program you in such a way you can solve your problems so you can help somebody else.
So how can I solve a problem on air conditioning when I don't know?
I forget the air conditioning.
Oh, okay.
My point is that you came to the car making the assumption we could help you on your air conditioning. We could solve your air conditioning. Every time our phone rings at the office, they call because they're asking us to solve that problem. If you can't solve problems and learn how to solve problems in your life, God can never increase your stature and favor so that you can help other people to solve their problems. God has you here for only one reason, just to get you through and solve your problems so that you can help somebody else and solve them problems.
But
Here's another one, diligence. He becometh poor that dealeth with a slack hand, but the soul of diligence shall be made fat. Diligent. Problem solving. Excellence.
What's the diligence again? What's the diligence again?
I can't hear.
What's the diligence?
Diligent,
Diligence. Efficiency.
Stick to it.
prompt.
Getting it done. Give you another one. Cooperation. This means unity. All we have today is division. Follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. Then it has favor, and that's with in authority. Seest thou a man diligent in his business, he will not stand before mean men. So anyway, 5 areas if you want to be reaching toward favor, which needs more definition and stature. And the other one, wisdom.
Let me say something about the air conditioning. That was planned. I prayed for that. I
Good,
said
now you're
if
making
you
my
show-
points.
If you show